Hello everyone. Welcome back to another scary story, your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes, relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. There are certain moments in life that feel wrong. Not in the way a nightmare does, where fear is immediate and overwhelming, but in the way a cold breath on the back of your neck sends a slow shiver down your spine. A feeling of something watching, something waiting. That's how it felt that evening. The sky hung heavy with thick gray clouds, the last traces of daylight fading behind the rows of houses in my neighborhood. Streetlights flickered on, casting long, stretched-out shadows over the cracked pavement. The world smelled like damp earth and distant rain, the kind of air that made everything feel quieter than it should be. I wasn't supposed to be out this late. Mom would be pissed. But I had lost track of time again, wandering further than I should have, letting my thoughts drift. It wasn't until I heard laughter, sharp and playful, that I snapped back to the present. A little boy stood in the middle of the street. He was small, maybe 6 or 7, with dark, messy hair and pale skin. Barefoot. His clothes were loose, like they didn't quite fit him, and his hands were sticky with something dark. Mud, paint, blood? I hesitated. "Hey, kid," I called, stepping closer. "What are you doing out here?" He tilted his head, blinking at me with large, glassy eyes. "I'm playing," he said simply. His voice was light, almost sing-song. I frowned. There was no one else around. No parents, no other kids. Just him, standing alone in the middle of the empty street. "Where do you live?" I asked. His lips curled into a wide, too-perfect grin. "I live here?" That didn't make sense. "Do you need help?" I pressed. Something about this kid set me on edge. His smile widened. He took a step forward. "I'm a little monster," he whispered, voice dropping into something cold, something unnatural. "And I'm going to kill you if you don't run." I didn't think. I just moved. The second I turned, I heard the patter of bare feet slapping against the pavement behind me. He was chasing me, and he was fast. I sprinted down the street, my heart slamming against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away, to not look back. But I could hear him, laughing, his small footsteps growing louder. Closer, I risked a glance over my shoulder. He wasn't there. I stumbled to a stop, gasping for breath. The street was empty, silent. Not even the wind stirred. But I knew I hadn't imagined him. A shiver crawled down my spine. Somewhere in the shadows, something was still watching me. I stood there, panting, my breath coming out in sharp gasps. The silence pressed down on me, thick and unnatural, as if the world had been drained of sound. The street was empty. No little boy, no laughter. No sign that anything had been there at all. But I wasn't imagining things. I knew what I saw, what I heard. A sudden rustle behind me made my stomach clench. My whole body tensed as I whipped around, scanning the street, the yards, the darkened windows of the houses. Nothing. Just shadows, stretching long under the streetlights. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe. "Think, Becky." Maybe he ran off. Maybe he was just some weird kid messing with me. I had to be overreacting, right? And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I needed to get home. I started walking, my pace quick but not quite running. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the usual hum of distant cars or murmured voices from nearby houses strangely absent. The only sound was the crunch of my sneakers on the pavement. And then, tap, 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 footsteps. I froze. They were light, quick, just a few paces behind me. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. The street was still empty. A chill slithered down my spine. I wasn't crazy. I heard them. I forced myself to keep moving, faster now. My hands balled into fists. My house wasn't far, just a few more blocks. I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to look over my shoulder again. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came again, this time closer. No, not closer, right behind me. I ran. My feet pounded the pavement as I sprinted toward my street, my lungs burning, my heartbeat a wild drum in my ears. I didn't care how ridiculous I looked. I just needed to get inside, to lock the door, to get away from... Something cold brushed against the back of my neck. I choked on a scream and stumbled forward, nearly falling. My vision blurred with panic as my house finally came into view. The porch light was on. Safe. Almost there. I flew up the steps, yanking open the door and slamming it shut behind me. My fingers fumbled with the lock, twisting it until I heard the click. Silence. I pressed my back against the door, chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. My hands were shaking. For a long moment, I just stood there listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No laughter. No little boy whispering threats in the dark. I swallowed hard and pressed my forehead against the door. What the hell just happened? After a while, I forced myself to move. I peeked through the peephole, my pulse still hammering. The street was still, empty, just as it should be. But something gnawed at the edges of my mind. The boy had been real. I knew it. And whatever he wasn't gone. I didn't go to bed right away. I couldn't. Even though I was safe inside, my skin still prickled. My nerves stretched too thin. The house felt too quiet, too still. The kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of every little sound. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, the wind tapping against the window. I made my way to the kitchen, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. Maybe some water would help. Maybe I just needed to breathe. As I reached for a glass, something caught my eye. The back door. It was locked. I checked twice, but that wasn't what made my stomach clench. It was the tiny smudged handprint on the glass. Small. Too small. Like a child's. I sucked in a sharp breath and took a slow step back. No way. No way. That hadn't been there before. I would have seen it. A cold unease slithered through me. Maybe it was old. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it. Or maybe... A soft sound broke the silence. Scratch. 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 My breath hitched. It was coming from the window above the sink. Slow. Deliberate. Like nails dragging against the glass. I forced myself to look up. At first, there was nothing. Just my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and pale. But as I leaned in, trying to see beyond the glare of the kitchen light, something moved. A shadow. Small. Just outside the window. I stumbled back, nearly knocking the glass off the counter. My pulse roared in my ears. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I reached for the light switch and flicked it off. The kitchen plunged into darkness. My breathing was too loud, too uneven. I forced myself to look at the window again, my eyes slowly adjusting. And then a face. Small, pale, pressed against the glass. The boy. He was grinning, his lips curled too wide, his teeth small and sharp. His eyes dark and bottomless locked onto mine. He raised one tiny hand and placed it flat against the glass, right over the old handprint. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, without breaking eye contact, he lifted his other hand and dragged his nails down the window. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something snapped inside me. I bolted from the kitchen, my body moving before my brain could catch up. I ran upstairs, my heart pounding, my vision swimming. I didn't stop until I was in my room, the door slammed shut and locked behind me. Silence. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving. Had he followed me? I listened. Nothing. After what felt like forever, I crept toward my window and peered out. The backyard was empty. No boy, no footprints. But I knew he had been there, and I knew this wasn't over. I didn't sleep. Even after checking every lock in the house twice, even after shutting my blinds tight, the fear still coiled in my gut. My ears strained for any sound, my mind refusing to let go of what I'd seen. That boy, that grin, the way he knew I was watching. I curled up in bed, knees pulled to my chest, the blankets wrapped around me like a shield. My phone sat on my nightstand, but I didn't dare reach for it. Who would I even call? The police? And say what? There's a creepy kid outside my house? They'd laugh me off. Or worse, think I was losing it. But I wasn't. I wasn't. I squeezed my eyes shut. Just for a second. Just to rest. Then, a whisper. Soft. Barely audible. Right outside my door. I stopped breathing. My fingers tightened around the blanket. Another whisper. Low. Words I couldn't make out. The doorknob rattled. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. Then a slow, deliberate knock. Tap, tap, tap. I clamped a hand over my mouth. My body refused to move, my muscles locked in place. The air in my room felt colder, heavier. I waited. The silence stretched on, long enough to make me question if I'd imagined it. Then, from beneath the door, a giggle. I choked back a sob, my body trembling. No. 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 This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw open the window and climb out if I had to. But I couldn't move. I could only sit there, heart slamming against my ribs, waiting for whatever was on the other side of the door to make its next move. Minutes passed, then more. Then, nothing. The air shifted, the weight of unseen eyes lifting. The room felt normal again. Almost. I forced myself to breathe. I had to check. I had to know. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone, the screen's glow burning my eyes in the darkness. The time read 3:12 a.m. Slowly, I inched toward the door. My bare feet barely made a sound against the floor. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear anything. Silence. My fingers hovered over the lock. Then a whisper, so close it felt like it was inside my own head. I see you. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at the door, at the sliver of darkness beneath it. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the feeling was gone. I didn't open the door. Not that night. I crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket over my head like I used to when I was little, like it could protect me. But deep down, I knew the truth. That boy, he wasn't finished with me yet. Morning came too soon. I must have fallen asleep at some point, though I had no memory of it. The last thing I remembered was the whisper at my door, the way my heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would shatter. Now, sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting the room into thin, golden slashes. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. But then I saw the scratches, thin, jagged marks on the wood of my bedroom door, right where the boy had stood. I sat up too fast, my pulse spiking. My fingers traced the grooves in the wood, the ridges rough beneath my touch. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. He had been here. I yanked the door open, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty. silent. Morning light made everything feel normal again, but I knew better. Something wasn't right. I forced myself to move, to go through the motions of a normal day. Shower, change, pretend everything was okay. But as I walked down the stairs, the weight of unseen eyes pressed against my back. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The kitchen was eerily quiet. I poured a bowl of cereal, but I wasn't hungry. Every noise felt too loud, the clink of the spoon, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. Then I noticed it. The back door was unlocked. My stomach dropped. I knew. I had locked it last night. I checked. Twice. I swallowed hard and approached it slowly, my fingers tightening around the handle. Through the glass, my backyard looked normal. Sunlight glowed over the grass. A breeze rustled the trees, but something felt off. The shadows didn't look right. They stretched too far, twisting at strange angles, shifting when nothing moved. My breath hitched. I blinked, telling myself it was just the way the light fell, just my mind playing tricks on me. Then one of the shadows moved. Not a normal sway, not a flicker. It shifted, sliding across the grass, stretching toward the house. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering, and then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw him, the boy, standing in the middle of my yard, grinning. I spun around, but the yard was empty, nothing but grass and trees swaying in the wind. I turned back to the glass. He was still there, staring at me. My breath hitched. The reflection wasn't just of the boy. The shadows around him were moving too, crawling, twisting, reaching, for me. I scrambled back, slamming into the counter. My heart felt like it would burst out of my chest. Then, just like that, the reflection vanished. But I knew he was still out there, and he was getting closer. I didn't go outside. I couldn't. Even after the boy's reflection vanished from the glass, I felt his presence lingering like a shadow at the edge of my vision. The back door remained locked. This time I double-checked again, but it didn't make me feel safer. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if the danger was outside anymore. Something had changed. The house no longer felt like my own. I moved cautiously through the rooms, my skin crawling with the eerie sensation that I was not alone. The air felt heavier, charged, like something unseen had pressed itself into the very walls. Every floorboard creaked too loudly. Every shadow seemed to stretch when I wasn't looking. I forced myself to breathe. "Calm down, Becky. You're being paranoid. Just shaken up, that's all." But then I saw it. The living room. Something was wrong with the mirrors. We had a large mirror hanging above the fireplace, Mom's idea. It reflected the whole room. But as I passed by, something made me stop. My reflection was slower than me. A split-second delay, barely noticeable. But it was there. I turned my head. My reflection hesitated before doing the same. A sharp chill skitters down my spine. I lifted a hand. My reflection followed, too late. It wasn't me. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The reflection smiled. I did not. I choked on a gasp and spun around, expecting what? That the thing in the mirror had stepped out? That it was behind me now? But there was nothing. I turned back, chest heaving. The mirror was normal again. My reflection stared back, wide-eyed, terrified, but normal. No delay, no smile. Had I imagined it? No. No. Too much had happened for this to be in my head. I needed to leave. I turned for the stairs, gripping the railing with trembling hands. My room. I just needed to get to my room, shut the door, and think. Halfway up the staircase, a whisper brushed against my ear. "Don't go in there." I froze. The voice was right behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. The house was empty. silent. But that whisper, it wasn't the boy's voice. It was deeper. Wrong. Something else was here. Something worse. I backed up the rest of the stairs, never taking my eyes off the hallway below. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, to never look back. But I couldn't move, because from the dark hallway downstairs, a soft sound reached my ears. A giggle. Then, footsteps, coming up the stairs. The footsteps were slow, measured. Each one sent a jolt of ice-cold fear through my veins. I stood frozen on the staircase, halfway between my bedroom and the front door, torn between two terrible choices. Run. Down. Toward the thing in the dark, or run. Up. To my room and trap myself inside. Think, Becky. Think. Another step. Closer. I couldn't see it. The bottom of the staircase was swallowed in shadows, darker than it should have been. I squinted, willing my eyes to adjust to see. Another step. Too close now. I sucked in a sharp breath and bolted. Up. I sprinted the last few steps, heart hammering, and dove into my bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled with the lock. Click. Locked. Safe. Safe. I stumbled back, pressing a trembling hand over my mouth. My whole body shook, my breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. Silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then tap, tap, tap. A knock. My stomach twisted. It wasn't loud, not demanding, just a soft, almost playful knock. Like someone was testing the door. Like someone knew I was on the other side. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't happening. This isn't real. But it was. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the knob twisted, slow, deliberate, testing. My breath hitched, my whole body locked in place, every muscle screaming for me to run. But there was nowhere to go. The knob rattled harder. I swallowed down a sob. Please stop. Please. And then, it did. Silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Seconds passed, then minutes. I dared to hope that maybe it was gone. But then, a whisper, right against the door. Let me in, Becky. I knew that voice. My blood turned to ice. It was my mother's voice. No. She wasn't home. She had left for work early this morning. I was alone. It wasn't her. I clenched my fists, pressing myself against the farthest wall. The voice came again, soft, coaxing. Wrong. It's just me, sweetie. Open the door. I shook my head violently, my nails digging into my palms. Don't listen. Don't listen. Becky. Something scratched against the wood. Long, slow, deep. Like nails. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut. The air in the room felt heavier. Thick. Suffocating. Like something was pressing in from all sides. Then, silence. The weight lifted. I forced myself to move. Slowly, carefully. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against it. Nothing. I waited. Minutes passed. Then I did the stupidest thing imaginable. I looked under the door, and there, in the sliver of space between the floor and the wood, I saw feet. Bare, small, and facing the wrong way. I bit down on my lip so hard I tasted blood. The feet didn't move. They just stood there, toes pointed the wrong way, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side had been put together wrong. My breath was shallow, every instinct screaming at me to move, to hide, to do something, but I couldn't. I was trapped. And then, slowly, the feet turned. Not like a person would turn. There was no shifting of weight, no natural movement. They just rotated in place. Bones shouldn't bend that way. I slapped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Then, they lifted. Like whoever they belonged to was rising, floating. A shadow moved beneath the door. I jerked away, my heart slamming against it to my ribs. No, no, no. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. A new sound filled the air. A wet, ragged breathing. Not human. It was deep and uneven, like something was struggling to breathe through lungs that weren't made for air. The sound slithered under the door, curling around me, sinking into my bones. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. Go away. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought it over and over like a prayer. The breathing stopped. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, waiting, listening. Nothing. Finally, I dared to look again. The feet were gone. My stomach twisted. That didn't make me feel any better. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. Just the normal hush of the house. Was it gone? I reached for the lock with trembling fingers, hesitated, then slowly, carefully, twisted it. Click. The lock disengaged. I held my breath and turned the knob. The door creaked open an inch, then two. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath, but I didn't step out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. Then, a creak down the hall. I snapped my head toward the sound. My mother's bedroom door was coming. Open. I knew I had seen it shut before. The air inside was dark. Too dark. Wrong. The hallway light should have reached inside, but the shadows inside her room seemed to swallow it. And then, a shape shifted in the darkness. Something moved inside. My stomach twisted. I wasn't alone. A soft whisper crawled through the silence. Becky. It was my mother's voice again, but I knew better. I stepped back. One step, then another. The door inside her room creaked. Something was coming out. I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran down the hall, heart hammering, lungs burning, the air behind me thick with something wrong. Shadows stretched, twisted, reaching. The floor felt uneven beneath my feet, like the house itself was shifting. A whisper slithered through the silence. Becky, don't run. I did not stop. The stairs, the front door. I just had to reach it. Get out. Creak. Behind me. I knew if I turned around I would see it. Something wearing my mother's voice. Something that had always been here. My foot hit the last step. The door. I grabbed the knob, yanking, twisting, locked. No. I fumbled with the deadbolt, hands shaking so hard I could barely grip it. Come on. Then, a cold breath against my ear. You're already inside, Becky. The voice wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside my head. I choked on a scream and threw my entire weight against the door. It burst open. Cold night air crashed into me. The street, the trees, the sky all real. I stumbled forward, nearly collapsing onto the porch. My skin buzzed, the weight pressing down on me, vanishing the second I crossed the threshold. The house groaned behind me. I turned. The front door slammed shut on its own. I backed away, gasping, my body shaking so hard I thought my bones would shatter. Through the window I saw something move, a shape in the darkness, and then a face appeared behind the glass. Mine, but not mine. She smiled and raised a hand to wave. I ran. I never went back. I didn't tell my mother what happened. How could I? How could I explain that something else was in our house now? She didn't notice anything wrong when she came home. But I knew. And sometimes, when I pass by a mirror, I see it, a flicker, a smile that isn't mine. And I wonder, did I ever really get out? The castle stood on the edge of the moors, its silhouette sharp against the stormy English sky. Time had bent its stone walls, ivy coiling like veins over the cracks. The year was 2024, but inside those walls, time felt like a trick, an illusion warped by whispers carried through empty halls. Maybe we should have known better. Maybe we should have asked why no one ever stayed there twice. But when you're young, rich, and a little reckless, the unknown feels like an invitation. It was Oliver's idea. He always had a way of making the bizarre sound thrilling. A real castle. He had grinned, tossing the brochure onto the bar table. Isolated, historic, and best of all, haunted. We had laughed then, the kind of careless laughter that feels untouchable. 10 of us, bonded by old friendships and new indulgences. We weren't ghost hunters or skeptics looking to prove a point. We just wanted a weekend away from London, a few nights of good whiskey, bad decisions, and stories to tell. I should have known something was wrong the moment we arrived. The drive up had been long, the winding roads narrowing as the GPS lost its way. Rain had started halfway through, blurring the windshield as we left civilization behind. By the time the castle loomed into view, dusk had settled in, painting everything in shades of gray and shadow. The place was massive, towers clawing at the sky, stone walls damp from the mist. A heavy iron gate groaned as it swung open, almost reluctant to let us in. A single lantern flickered near the entrance, casting just enough light to show the inscription on the archway. The words were Old Latin, carved deep into the stone. Oliver squinted at it. Nemo impune lascit. What's that mean? Asked Sam, shaking out his wet hoodie. Oliver smirked. Something dramatic, probably. No one provokes us with impunity. Hear that? Lydia grinned, nudging me. Guess we better behave. We laughed. But even then, I felt it. A pressure in the air, like the castle itself was holding its breath. The caretaker met us at the entrance, an older man with deep-set eyes and a gaze that lingered too long. You booked the full weekend, he said, voice slow, deliberate. Few make it past the first night. It was meant as a joke, I think. But no one laughed. Inside, the castle was even colder than the storm outside. The air smelled of damp stone and old wood. The walls stretched high, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow as we passed. The grand staircase split into 2 winding paths, leading deeper into the unknown. This place is incredible, Oliver said, his voice bouncing off the stone. We should get lost in it. Something about his words made my stomach turn. The night had just begun. We settled in quickly, claiming rooms like children picking beds at a sleepover. The castle had more than enough space, long winding corridors lined with heavy wooden doors, each leading to chambers draped in velvet and dust. The air inside was thick, stale, as if it had been holding on to its past for too long. The fireplace in the great hall struggled against the damp chill, its flames flickering weakly as we poured drinks and sprawled across the ancient furniture. The mood was light at first. Oliver made sure of that, spinning tales of the castle's history, embellishing every detail. "They say the family who built this place was cursed," he said, swirling his whiskey. "Something about betrayal, revenge. You know, the usual Gothic drama." "Every old castle has a ghost story," Lydia chimed in, leaning against me with a smirk. "It's part of the charm." "Right, but this one is different." Oliver leaned forward, lowering his voice. "No one really knows how they died. The records just stop." That was the thing about Oliver. He always knew just how to keep a story hanging in the air, letting it linger in the back of your mind even when the laughter moved on. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady whisper, tapping against the tall windows. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone, weaving through the castle like something searching. I don't know when the unease truly started. Maybe it was when I noticed the way the firelight cast our shadows against the walls, how they stretched, twisted, almost too long. Or maybe it was when I caught Sam staring at the portrait above the fireplace, his face unreadable. The painting was old, the oil cracked with age. A man stood at its center, dressed in dark formal wear, his face sharp, eyes black. But it was the way he was painted, the unnatural tilt of his head, the slight curve of his lips, like he knew something we didn't. "Creepy bastard," Sam muttered. Lydia laughed, tossing a pillow at him. "It's just a painting." But when I looked back at it, the uneasy feeling didn't fade. At some point, the group split off, some heading to bed, others wandering the castle, half drunken, daring each other into dark corridors. I stayed behind, lingering by the fire with Oliver and Amelia. Then we heard it. A single knock. It came from the hallway behind us, sharp and deliberate. We froze, eyes meeting in silent question. The castle was old. It creaked, sighed, breathed. But this was different. Oliver, never one to back down from a thrill, stood. "Probably just the wind," he said, but he was already moving toward the source. Amelia grabbed his arm. "Don't," he grinned. "Come on, where's the fun in that?" The corridor was dark, the air thick, and as Oliver disappeared into the shadows, I swore I heard it again. A knock, and then a whisper. Oliver vanished into the dark hallway before I could stop him. The glow from the fireplace barely reached past the threshold, and beyond that, the corridor was swallowed in blackness. The castle seemed to breathe around us, stretching its silence too long, too deep. "Oliver." My voice came out quieter than I intended, barely carrying over the crackling fire. Amelia shifted beside me, arms crossed. "This isn't funny." A long second passed, then another, and then a whisper, soft, faint, just enough to prickle the back of my neck. I couldn't tell what it said, but it wasn't Oliver's voice. It was something else, something distant, curling through the shadows like a breath against the skin. Amelia took a step back. "We should get the others." Before I could agree, Oliver's laughter cut through the tension. It came from the end of the corridor, light and mocking. A shape moved in the dark, a shadow detaching from the blackness as he strolled back into the firelight. "Relax," he grinned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Nothing's there. You guys are too easy." I exhaled, tension slipping from my shoulders. "You're a dick, you know that?" Oliver just shrugged. "I was expecting more from this place. Spooky old castle, a history of mysterious deaths, and the best it can do is knock on a wall. I'm disappointed." Amelia was still staring past him, into the hallway. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sweater, knuckles pale. I swear I heard something whisper. Oliver rolled his eyes. Your imagination. This place gets in your head if you let it. But something about the way he spoke. It was too casual, too dismissive. Like he was forcing himself not to admit that he heard it too. Amelia wasn't convinced. I think we should tell the others. Oliver groaned. Tell them what? That an old house made a noise? Before we could argue, a sudden thump echoed from upstairs. We all froze. It wasn't a creak or a soft shift in the wood. It was heavy, deliberate, like something had fallen. Or someone. Amelia inhaled sharply. That wasn't the wind. Oliver hesitated for the first time that night, just for a second. Then he shook his head. Probably just one of the others messing around. Come on. I wasn't so sure, but I followed. We moved up the staircase slowly, footsteps muffled by the thick rug. The air felt denser here, heavier, like the walls were pressing in. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness, the only light coming from a single candle flickering on a small wooden table. The doors to the guest rooms lined both sides, silent, unmoving. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a door creaked open. None of us had touched it. I glanced at Oliver. For the first time, he wasn't smiling. The door at the end of the hallway stood slightly ajar, its darkness yawning wide, waiting. The candle on the table flickered violently, casting shifting shadows against the walls. None of us spoke. None of us moved. Then Oliver, because of course it had to be him, stepped forward. Wait, I whispered, grabbing his sleeve. He barely glanced at me. It's just a door. But it wasn't just a door. Not when it had opened on its own. Not when the air in the hallway felt thick enough to drown in. Amelia took a step back, shaking her head. We should wake the others. Oliver sighed. You two are being ridiculous. He reached out, fingers brushing the wood. The door groaned under his touch, swinging wider. A slow, painful creak echoed down the hall. The room inside was dark, empty. But something felt off, like the air inside was colder, untouched by the warmth of the castle. The smell of old fabric and dust filled my nose, but underneath it, something else lingered. Something faint, metallic. I swallowed. This isn't one of our rooms. Oliver stepped inside, his silhouette swallowed by the dimness. Looks like a study. I hesitated, but the thought of standing alone in the hallway felt worse than following him in. Amelia lingered in the doorway, fingers gripping the frame as if she needed to hold on to something solid. The room was small compared to the others. A large wooden desk sat in the sea. Enter, covered in a thin layer of dust. Heavy curtains hung over the window, blocking out the storm outside. Bookshelves lined the walls, their spines faded with age. And on the far side of the room, beside a cold, unused fireplace, a chair. At first I thought it was empty, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A dent in the cushion, the slight indentation of an unseen weight, like someone had just been sitting there. A chill crawled up my spine. I opened my mouth to say something, to tell Oliver that we needed to leave. But then, the chair rocked. Just a fraction, a slow, measured shift, like someone was just getting up. Amelia let out a sharp breath. No. Oliver's bravado cracked. He took a step back. Did you... The door slammed shut behind us. Amelia's scream cut through the air. I lunged for the handle, yanking hard, but it wouldn't budge. Then, the whisper returned. Right behind me. Soft. Cold. A breath against my ear. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Just shadows. Just the chair, now still. Oliver cursed, shoving at the door. It groaned under his weight. then burst open as if whatever held it closed had finally let go. We stumbled out, gasping for air. The hallway was silent. Still. But we weren't alone. Somewhere, deeper in the castle, a floorboard creaked. Someone else was awake. The creak echoed through the hallway, distant but deliberate. Not the soft settling of an old house, not the shifting of wind through the cracks. This was weight pressing down, moving. Footsteps. Amelia grabbed my wrist. "Someone's here." Oliver shook his head, but his usual smirk was gone. "It's probably just Sam or Lydia." I wanted to believe him, but something about the sound, slow, measured, like someone was walking just out of sight, made my stomach tighten. The candle on the small table flickered violently, its light struggling against something unseen. The air had changed again, colder, thicker, like the walls were breathing with us. Then another sound, a soft tap, 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 from downstairs. Oliver turned toward the staircase. "We should check." Amelia's grip on me tightened. "No, we should wake the others. Now." She was right. Every instinct screamed to run, to get as far away from that sound as possible. But Oliver was already moving, his footsteps near silent against the thick rug as he peered over the railing. I swallowed hard and followed, my pulse hammering in my ears. Amelia stayed behind, half hidden in the shadows. From the top of the staircase, the great hall stretched below, the fireplace still glowing faintly. At first, everything looked normal. Chairs, glasses left from earlier, the faint reflection of firelight against the polished floor. Then I saw it. The door we'd locked earlier, the heavy wooden one at the front of the castle, wide open. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only mist curling along the stone steps, creeping inside like fingers. The wind should have been howling through the open space, but the air was still, silent. A shape moved in the doorway. My breath caught. It wasn't clear, more of a smudge in the darkness, something shifting at the edges of my vision. A trick of the light, maybe. Then just as I blinked, it was gone. Oliver's voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you see that?" I nodded. A deep, unnatural cold crept up my spine. Not fear. Something worse. Something ancient. Then the door slammed, shut, hard. Amelia yelped behind us. I whirled around, heart pounding. She stood at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed, her breath coming in short gasps. "Upstairs," she whispered. "I heard it again." Another creak. Closer this time. Something was moving through the second floor. None of us spoke. None of us breathed. Then a voice. Soft. Wrong. Right behind us. "You shouldn't be here." The candle blew out. Darkness swallowed everything. The candle went out as if snuffed by unseen fingers. The darkness was absolute, swallowing everything. My breath hitched, ears straining for movement, for anything. Anyone. Then, a whisper. Close. Right beside me. "You shouldn't be here." A cold breath tickled my skin. My stomach clenched, and every muscle in my body locked. I didn't want to turn. I couldn't turn. Amelia's sharp inhale broke the silence, her hand finding my wrist in the dark. She was shaking. Oliver cursed under his breath, fumbling with his phone. A beam of light cut through the blackness as he switched on the flashlight, the pale glow shaking in his grip. There was no one there. Nothing but the dim hallway, the staircase, the still air. The candle on the table sat untouched. The door at the far end of the hall was still slightly ajar, the room beyond it shrouded in shadow. But something had spoken, and it had been right next to me. We need to wake the others. My voice barely sounded like my own. Amelia nodded quickly. Oliver hesitated, his usual bravado cracking around the edges, but he didn't argue. We moved fast, pushing open doors, shaking our friends awake. Sam was the first to sit up, blinking in confusion. What the hell? Shh. I pressed a finger to my lips. Something's in the castle. That got his attention. He swung his legs over the bed, frowning. Like, someone broke in? No. Amelia swallowed hard. Not someone. Something. More doors opened. Lydia, Marcus, and the others emerged, groggy and irritated, but as soon as they saw our faces, the complaints died on their lips. What's going on? Lydia rubbed her arms, shivering. Oliver ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. We heard something. The front door was open. A voice spoke to us, I finished. But there was no one there. Silence settled between us, thick and uneasy. A storm had been raging outside earlier, but now the night was dead still. No wind, no rain. Then Sam frowned. Where's Jake? We turned, scanning the small crowd. Jake wasn't there. I swore under my breath, pushing past them, moving fast down the hallway. His room was at the far end, the door slightly open. My pulse pounded as I reached it, hesitated, then shoved it fully open. The bed was empty. Sheets half tangled, the pillow indented where his head had been. But he was gone. Something was off. The window. It was open. Cold night air trickled in, carrying the damp scent of rain. Beyond it, nothing but the darkness of the castle grounds. Lydia's voice was small. He wouldn't have climbed out, would he? A sick feeling twisted in my gut. No, not on his own. The window gaped open like a silent invitation. A thread of cold night air snaked through the room, carrying the damp scent of earth and rain. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped closer, gripping the wooden frame. The mist outside curled thick along the castle grounds, swallowing everything past a few feet. No footprints on the stone ledge, no sign of a struggle. Just Jake's empty bed and the stillness pressing in around us. This doesn't make sense, Lydia murmured. She hovered near the door, arms wrapped around herself. He wouldn't just leave. Maybe he went downstairs? Marcus offered, but his voice wavered. He didn't believe it either. No. Amelia's gaze was locked on the open window. Something's wrong. Oliver exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. All right, we need to split up and check the castle. No, I said immediately. That's how people die in horror movies. Lydia nodded. We stick together. But even as we agreed, the air inside the room thickened, like the castle itself was listening, waiting. Then a sound, faint, from outside. A whisper, low, almost distant, but unmistakably, Jake's voice. Help me. My blood ran cold. Lydia's grip on my arm tightened. Tell me you heard that. We all had. Oliver was already moving, grabbing one of the lanterns from the hallway. We go outside. Everything in me screamed against it. The voice was wrong. Off. It had been soft, weak, but not panicked. Not desperate. Like it was mimicking Jake, rather than actually calling for help. But the alternative? Leaving him out there alone? I swallowed hard. We stay together. The castle doors groaned as we pushed them open. Mist curled along the stone steps, rolling over the ground like it had a mind of its own. The moon was buried behind thick clouds, leaving everything cloaked in shifting gray. The voice came again. Help me. This time, it was closer. To our left, past the overgrown hedges leading toward the castle's abandoned chapel, a silhouette moved in the mist, barely visible through the haze. "Jake? Jake!" Sam called. He stepped forward, but I grabbed his hoodie, pulling him back. Something wasn't right. The figure wasn't walking. It wasn't moving. Like a person. It was gliding. Just slightly, as if the mist carried it forward. And then it stopped. Still, waiting. The hair on my arms rose. Then, in the thick silence, a second shadow emerged. Not Jake. Taller. Wrong. Limbs just a little too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. It stood beside the first figure, unmoving, watching. The breath left my lungs. My body screamed at me to run. And then, the lantern in Oliver's hand snuffed out. Darkness swallowed us whole. The lantern died as if something had stolen the flame straight from Oliver's grasp. The night swallowed us, thick and suffocating. I couldn't even see the mist anymore. Just an endless, pulsing darkness pressing in from all sides. Then came the sound, not a whisper this time. Breathing, slow, deep, right behind us. I turned too fast, my foot slipping on the damp stone. My heartbeat roared in my ears, but there was nothing. Nothing but the blackness curling at the edges of my vision. And then, a shuffle. Bare feet on wet grass. Too close. Oliver fumbled with his phone, its screen flashing to life in his trembling hands. The weak glow cut through the mist just enough to reveal the figures standing ahead. Jake's shape still hovered near the chapel, unmoving. But the taller thing beside him, it was leaning closer now, like it had finally noticed us. My stomach twisted violently. It was wrong, not just in its shape, but in the way it existed. Like it wasn't fully there, shifting slightly, its edges flickering in and out of sight, as if the mist itself was holding it together. Then its head jerked toward us. A sharp, unnatural movement. I heard Lydia suck in a breath. No eyes. No features at all. Just darkness, where a face should have been. I grabbed Oliver's wrist. Back inside, now. No one argued. We turned, moving fast toward the castle doors, but the moment we did, the breathing came again. Louder, ahead of us. I skidded to a stop. The air turned thick, with the scent of damp stone and something metallic. Blood? No. Older. Then the doors slammed shut. Shit! Oliver crashed against them, shoving, twisting the iron handle. Locked. No. Not locked. Held. I could feel it. Something on the other side, pressing just as firmly against us, keeping us out. A low creak echoed behind us. I turned slowly. Jake was gone. Only the tall, faceless thing remained. And it had moved. Closer. Lydia whimpered. "What does it want?" The whisper came again. Soft. Twisting. But this time, it wasn't Jake's voice. It was mine. "Let me in." I choked on my own breath. The others heard it. They knew it was my voice. But I hadn't spoken. The thing tilted its head, watching, studying. Then from the mist, more shapes. Not just one. 5, 6. More. All of them silent, motionless, waiting. Oliver's hands were slick with sweat as he twisted the handle again. Then suddenly, the doors burst open. We stumbled inside, crashing onto the stone floor. I kicked back, slamming the heavy doors shut behind us. Silence. No pounding, no scratching, no whispers. Nothing, as if they had never been there at all. But we knew better. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing us inside. My pulse pounded in my ears, but the silence on the other side was worse. No pounding fists, no whispers, no breathing, like they had never been there. But they were. Lydia was shaking. What the hell was that? What were they? Oliver backed away from the doors, chest rising and falling too fast. I don't know. Sam was pacing, running a hand through his hair. Jake's still out there. A thick, suffocating silence settled between us. He was right, but every instinct screamed at me not to open those doors again. The chapel, Amelia whispered. Her face was pale, eyes wide with some realization the rest of us hadn't caught up to yet. What? I asked. She swallowed hard. The history, this place, the people who built it, they never left. Oliver gave a dry, humorless laugh. Yeah, no shit. No, listen. She turned to us, voice urgent. The curse, the disappearances, it wasn't just about revenge. It was a ritual. The words settled like a weight in my chest. Amelia's fingers twisted in the hem of her sweater. The family who owned this castle centuries ago, they weren't just murdered. They were bound here, trapped. And every few generations. She hesitated, looking toward the doors. They need more. No one spoke. No one breathed. Something about the air inside the castle felt tighter. Now, like the walls themselves were listening. Marcus finally broke the silence. We need to get out. Now. Oliver scoffed. And go where? They locked the doors. No, not them. Amelia shook her head. Not the things outside. She turned, staring down the darkened hallway toward the grand staircase. The castle. A slow, sickening realization settled in my stomach. The doors had burst open for us. The second we ran from the things outside, the castle let us in, and then locked the doors behind us. We weren't safer inside. We were trapped. I turned, pressing my hands against the stone wall. The texture was rough, cold, so damn old. And then I felt it. A pulse. Deep, subtle, like something underneath the stone was alive. I jerked back, bile rising in my throat. Lydia shook her head, whispering, "This place isn't haunted." Amelia exhaled, her breath shaky. "No." She looked back at us, eyes dark with understanding. "It's hungry." The words barely settled before the first door creaked open. Not the front doors. One of the guest rooms. The one at the very end of the hallway. The one we hadn't touched. A single whisper slipped through the crack in the doorway. Not in Jake's voice. Not in mine. But in all of ours. "Come inside." The whisper curled through the hallway, soft but undeniable. Not one voice. All of our voices, tangled together like a song played in reverse. "Come inside." The door at the end of the hall stood slightly open, blackness spilling from the gap like ink bleeding into water. The castle held its breath, waiting. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, a floorboard creaked. Not from behind the door. From behind us. I turned too fast, my vision swimming. The grand hall stretched into shadows, the dying embers of the fireplace the only light left. The castle's walls loomed closer, the air thick and unmoving. Lydia swallowed hard. "What do we do?" The answer lodged itself in my throat like glass. Run? There was nowhere to go. Fight? Against what? Then, another creak, closer, and the smell. Damp earth, aged wood. Something deeper, older, like rot trapped in stone. Oliver's voice was barely a whisper. It's moving. And then I felt it. Not a sound, not a shadow. A presence. The air pressed down on us, thick as water, like the castle itself was folding inward. No more whispers, no more flickering shapes, just the feeling of something huge and unseen standing right behind me. I didn't turn, couldn't. Somewhere deep inside, I knew. If I looked, if I even acknowledged it, I wouldn't be me anymore. A cold, invisible touch trailed across my shoulder, and then the door at the end of the hall slammed open. A rush of air pulled at me, dragging me forward. Amelia screamed. Someone grabbed my wrist, yanking me back, but the castle was moving. The floor beneath us trembled, the walls groaning like something waking up after centuries of sleep. And in the doorway, darkness. Not an empty room, not shadows. A void, endless, starless. And from inside it, a figure stepped forward. Jake. Or something that looked like him. His face was pale, his eyes wrong, too deep, too hollow, as if something had scooped out whatever made him, him. His mouth moved. You shouldn't be here. The same words we'd heard before, the same voice. But now, hearing them from his lips, I understood. It wasn't a warning, it was a sentence. And then the castle breathed. A deep, shuddering inhale, and the door swallowed, him whole. Gone. Jake, the room, the void. The second the door slammed shut, the castle exhaled. The lights flickered back to life. The doors unlocked. The air thinned. And we ran. No one spoke as we fled. No one questioned it. We didn't stop until we reached the car, until the castle was shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror. By the time we reached town, the castle's outline had disappeared into the mist, like it had never been there at all. And Jake? Jake had never existed. Not in the photos on my phone. Not in the memories of our friends. Not in any record of our trip. 10 of us had arrived at the castle, but only 9 of us had left. The house looked normal. That was the worst part. Nestled in the woods just outside a small town, it had the kind of charm you'd expect from an old Airbnb listing. Warm porch lights, a wraparound deck, and a smell of damp wood that hinted at a long history. It wasn't fancy, but it was big enough for the 6 of us. Me, Jason, Liv, Ethan, Hannah, and Drew. We wanted a quiet weekend away from the city, somewhere we could drink, play games, and just unwind. It should have been perfect. I was the one who found the listing. Secluded getaway with a rustic feel, the description had said. The pictures showed a cozy interior, wooden beams, brick fireplace, old-fashioned furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. No modern amenities, but that was the point. Disconnect and relax, the owner had written in the reviews. But standing in front of it now, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the trees pressed too close, their branches tangled like grasping hands. Or maybe it was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, expectant kind. Like the house was waiting for something. We unloaded the car, carrying in our duffel bags and a weekend's worth of snacks and beer. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic. The walls were decorated with vintage paintings, the kind with two dark eyes that followed you when you walked past. The first thing I noticed was the basement door. It was in the hallway near the kitchen, an old wooden door with deep scratches along the frame. A heavy padlock held it shut, and a yellowed note was taped above it. "Do not open. Do not go down there." Jason laughed. "Okay, that's not creepy at all." Liv rolled her eyes. "It's probably just storage. Maybe the owner doesn't want us messing with their stuff." Or, Ethan grinned, "it's where they keep the bodies." His joke hung in the air a little too long. I ran my fingers over the scratches near the doorframe. They weren't random. They were deep, long, like something had clawed at the wood, trying to get out. Hannah shivered. "Let's just stay out of there, okay?" No one argued. We had the rest of the house, after all. A cozy living room with an old fireplace. A kitchen with mismatched cabinets. 3 bedrooms upstairs. And yet, no matter where I went, I kept glancing back at the basement door. That night, as we sat in the living room drinking, I swore I heard something. A faint creak. A whisper of movement. A sound that came from below, but the door was still locked. So I told myself it was nothing, for now. The fire crackled in the old stone fireplace, throwing flickering shadows across the living room. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat between me and Jason as we lounged on the worn-out couch, our friends scattered around the room. Ethan and Liv were playing some drinking game, laughing too loud, while Hannah scrolled through her phone, barely paying attention. Drew was by the window, peering out into the darkness like he expected something to be watching from the trees. The house creaked. Old places made noises, wood settling, wind slipping through unseen cracks. That's what I kept telling myself. But every so often, between the laughter and clinking glasses, I thought I heard something else. A soft rhythmic tapping. Faint, coming from below. I turned my head slightly, trying to listen. "Dude, you good?" Jason nudged me, his words slurred. I hesitated, then shook it off. "Yeah, thought I heard something." Ethan looked up from his game, eyes bleary. "If it's coming from the basement, I vote we ignore it." Liv smirked. "Scared?" "Nah, just smart. You saw the scratches on that door." Jason scoffed. "Probably rats. Or, I don't know, the pipes?" Another noise, louder this time. A deep, resonant thud. Everyone stopped talking. Hannah sat up straighter. "What was that?" Silence. Then, nothing. Just the fire crackling, the wind outside. Drew turned from the window. Sounded like it came from down there. No one moved. Jason, ever the brave idiot, stood up. "All right, let's check it out." Hannah grabbed his wrist. "Are you serious?" "Come on, we're all thinking it." He gestured toward the basement door. "It's probably just the house settling, but if we don't look, we'll freak ourselves out all night." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, sure. Let's investigate the obviously cursed basement. Great idea." But Jason was already moving, and because we were half drunk and stupid, we followed. The basement door loomed in the dim hallway, the padlock still in place. Up close, the scratches looked worse, deeper, erratic, like something had desperately tried to escape. Jason knocked on the door, laughing. "Hello? Any ghosts down there?" Silence. He reached for the knob. "Dude, it's locked," I reminded him. "So?" Jason jiggled the handle. "How? Harder." "What if..." Bang! Something slammed against the other side of the door. We stumbled back. Hannah gasped. Liv swore under her breath. I could feel my pulse hammering in my skull. That wasn't the house settling. That wasn't the wind. Jason let out a nervous laugh, backing away. "Okay, yeah, nope." We didn't talk about it after that. We just turned up the music, drank more than we should have, and pretended nothing was wrong. But that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, I heard it again. Soft, faint, a whisper, coming from beneath the floor. I didn't sleep. Even after everyone else passed out, Jason snoring on the couch, Hannah curled up in a blanket, Ethan and Liv whispering in their room, I stayed awake, listening. The house had settled into silence, but beneath it, I could still hear something. A faint, rhythmic scratching. Not loud, not constant, just there. At some point, I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of footsteps, slow, uneven. I blinked, disoriented. The fire had burned low, its embers casting weak red light across the room. The air was colder than before, an unnatural chill settling in my bones. Then I saw him. Drew. He was standing in the hallway near the basement door, not moving, just standing there, staring at it. Something about the way he stood made my stomach clench. His arms hung limp at his sides. His head was tilted slightly like he was listening to something. I sat up. Drew? My voice came out rough, too loud in the quiet house. He didn't react. A wave of unease rolled through me. I pushed the blanket off and stood. Dude, what are you doing? Still nothing. I took a cautious step closer. That's when I saw his fingers, twitching. His breathing was slow and shallow, like he was in a trance. Drew. I grabbed his shoulder. His whole body jerked. His eyes snapped to mine, wide and unfocused, like he didn't recognize me for a second. Then he inhaled sharply, stumbling back. What the? He looked around, dazed. Why am I here? You tell me, I said, heart still pounding. You were just standing here, staring at the door. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. I don't know. I don't remember getting up. A shiver crawled down my spine. Sleepwalking? Maybe. But the way he stood, the way he listened to something behind that door, it didn't feel right. We both turned toward the basement. The padlock was still in place. The door was still shut. But I swear, I could feel something on the other side. Watching. Drew let out a shaky breath. I'm going back to bed. I nodded, but even as he walked away, I didn't move. I waited, listened. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination and went back to the couch. I pulled the blanket over me, kept my back to the door, and closed my eyes. I should have stayed awake, because when morning came, Drew was gone. His bed was empty. His shoes were still by the door. His phone sat on the nightstand, screen cracked from where he had dropped it earlier. But Drew? Nowhere. We searched the whole house, then the woods outside. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no explanation. Just gone. And when I passed the basement door, I swore the scratches on the wood looked deeper than before. We tore through the house, calling Drew's name, but there was no answer. The kitchen, the bathrooms, the bedrooms, the attic, even outside in the woods, where the cold morning air bit at our skin, we searched. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of where he could have gone. He wouldn't just leave, Hannah whispered, hugging herself. His phone's still here. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Maybe he went into town. I don't know, maybe. He wouldn't go alone. Liv's voice was tight, her eyes darting toward the house like she was afraid to turn her back on it. And it's miles to the nearest store. I didn't say anything, because I knew where he had been last, by the basement door. I turned toward it slowly, the padlock still in place. The note above it faded and yellowed. Do not open. Do not go down there. The scratches along the wood looked deeper. I traced them with my fingers. Something wanted out. Jason noticed me staring. Dude, don't even think about it. He was standing here last night, I said quietly. Right here. Ethan swallowed. You think he went down there? Hannah shuddered. The door's locked. How could he? I didn't have an answer, but my gut told me something bad had happened. Something we weren't ready to understand. Jason grabbed his keys. I'm going into town. We need help. Liv shot him a look. You're gonna leave us here? After Drew just disappeared? Jason hesitated. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want to stay, but he also didn't want to split up. Fine, he muttered. But we need to do something. The sun was already dipping lower by the time we sat down in the living room again. No one ate. No one drank. We just sat there trying to make sense of what had happened. Then the noises started. At first, just the usual creaks of an old house settling. But then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from beneath us. We all froze. Jason turned his head slightly. Tell me you guys heard that. No one answered. The footsteps continued. Moving. Pacing. Right beneath our feet. My stomach turned to ice. I stood, stepping toward the basement door, barely breathing. Then, a whisper. Soft. Faint. My name. It came from below. Hannah let out a strangled gasp. We need to leave. Liv was already grabbing her coat. Agreed. But then something slammed against the basement door, hard. Jason jumped back, cursing. The impact rattled the frame, dust shaking loose from the walls. Another. Bang. Then, scratching. Deep, scraping sounds against the wood. And then, clear as day, we all heard it. A voice, distant, twisted. Let me out. It sounded like Drew, but it wasn't. No one moved. No one breathed. The voice, Drew's voice, but wrong, echoed through the hallway, muffled behind the basement door. A sick, warbling sound, like something was trying to sound human but didn't quite know how. Let me out. Hannah let out a shaky whimper, backing toward the front door. We need to go. Now. Jason didn't argue. He grabbed his keys, yanking open the door, and stopped. The sun had set, leaving the woods wrapped in a thick, unnatural darkness. The porch light barely reached past the railing, swallowed by the night like a living thing. The trees pressed too close, their branches twisted. Wrong. Like they'd shifted when we weren't looking. Jason cursed under his breath. Where the hell is the car? My stomach dropped. The driveway was empty. The car was gone. Ethan's voice was tight. That's not possible. We parked right there. Maybe it rolled, Jason started, but even he didn't believe that. The ground was flat. There was no way. Something didn't want us to leave. Hannah's breathing turned ragged. Call for help. Someone call. I already tried. Liv held up her phone, her fingers trembling. No service. I checked mine. Same thing. The bars were gone. The screen flickered for a moment. Then, static. No signal. No escape. A slow, rhythmic thump came from the basement door. We turned. The wood trembled, the padlock rattling. Something was behind it. Pressing. Waiting. Jason's jaw clenched. Screw this. He grabbed the nearest chair and wedged it under the front doorknob. We wait until morning. First light, we hike to town. No one argued. What else could we do? The air inside the house felt thicker, like the walls were closing in. The fire had burned down to weak embers, barely casting enough light to push back the dark. We gathered in the living room, close but silent, listening. Then the whispers started again, low, unintelligible, crawling through the floorboards. I hugged my knees to my chest. Do you think it's really him? Ethan shook his head. That's not Drew. Hannah shuddered. Then what is it? No one answered. Hours passed. Every noise made my skin crawl. The soft tap, tap, tap of something pacing below us. The wind outside, carrying whispers that sounded almost familiar. The fire flickered, its light stretching shadows across the walls. At some point, I must have dozed off. A sound woke me. Something soft. Breathing. I opened my eyes. Jason was gone. The chair was still against the front door, untouched. The others were still asleep. But Jason? The basement door was open. The padlock lay on the floor, snapped clean in half. The door itself stood slightly ajar, a dark gap leading down into nothing. And then I saw them. Footprints. Leading down the stairs. Jason's. Jason's footprints vanished into the dark. I stared at the open basement door, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. The others were still asleep. Hannah curled up in a ball, Ethan slumped against the couch, Liv clutching her phone in her lap. None of them had heard him leave. Or maybe he hadn't left. Maybe something had taken him. I swallowed hard and took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath me. Jason? My voice barely carried in the heavy silence. No answer. The basement yawned open, a black void swallowing the staircase. A cold draft seeped up from below, carrying a damp, rotten smell. The kind of scent that clung to old places left forgotten. A whisper drifted up. Faint. Distant. Come down. My skin crawled. I turned to wake the others, but then a sound. Soft footsteps. It's coming from below. Slow. Unnatural. Not quite human. Something was coming. Up the stairs. A shadow shifted in the darkness. My breath hitched. My body screamed. Run. But I couldn't move. Then I saw him. Jason. Or at least something that looked like him. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, just barely visible in the dim light. His face was wrong. Too pale. His skin stretched tight like it didn't quite fit. His eyes were wide and dark, his pupils too large, his lips curled in a strange, unnatural smile. He lifted a hand. His fingers twitched. You should come see. His voice was flat, empty, not Jason's. I took a step back. Where were you? His head tilted at an odd angle. I was waiting. A cold sweat prickled down my spine. Behind me, Liv stirred, mumbling in her sleep. Jason's things. Head snapped toward her with a sharp, jerky movement. His grin widened. I didn't think. I slammed the door shut. The moment it closed, a low, guttural scraping echoed from the other side. Not knocking, not footsteps. Something, dragging. Something too heavy to walk properly. I grabbed the broken padlock off the floor and shoved it through the latch as best I could. It wasn't secure, but it was something. My breathing was too loud, my hands shaking. The others were still asleep, unaware of what had just happened. I forced myself to step away from the door, swallowing back the panic rising in my throat. Jason was gone. But something had come back in his place, and it was still down there, waiting. Morning never came. At least it didn't feel like it. Hours passed, but the darkness outside remained, thick and unbroken. The trees beyond the porch seemed to press even closer, their twisted limbs reaching for the windows like skeletal fingers. No birds, no wind, just an unnatural, suffocating silence. The others woke one by one. Ethan was the first to notice. "Where's Jason?" I didn't answer. Liv rubbed her eyes, groggy. "Did he go looking for Drew?" I swallowed, my mouth dry. My voice cracked. I couldn't say it. Then Hannah saw the basement door. "Oh my God." They all turned. The padlock lay broken on the floor. The door, now shut, seemed to breathe with the house, as if something was still moving behind it. Ethan's eyes darkened. "Tell me he didn't go down there." I forced myself to nod. I heard him come back up. Relief flashed across Hannah's face, but then I added, "But it wasn't him." Silence. Liv let out a sharp breath, running her hands through her hair. "You mean, like, what? A copy? A ghost?" I didn't know how to explain it. The thing I saw, it had Jason's face, his voice, but it wasn't him. It was wrong. Ethan grabbed his phone, shaking it in frustration. Still no service. Liv rushed to the front door and yanked it open. What we saw made my stomach drop. The woods were gone, not like they had disappeared, but like they had shifted. The once familiar trees that lined the driveway now towered impossibly tall, their trunks twisted into gnarled spirals. The path where Jason's car should have been was nothing but blackness, stretching out into a void that shouldn't exist. Hannah gasped, her voice trembling. "Where are we?" I didn't have an answer. Liv took a shaky step onto the porch, then stopped. Her foot hovered just above the wooden step, but there was no shadow. The sun hadn't risen. The sky wasn't dark, but it wasn't white. Light either. It was just empty. Ethan grabbed her wrist, pulling her back inside. "Don't." She looked at him, confused. A sound. Low. Wet. Dripping. We turned. A dark stain spread along the ceiling, leaking down in thick, black rivulets. It dripped onto the wooden floor, pooling near the basement door. Then, a knock. Not from the front door. From below. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The door shuddered. Then Jason's voice. "Let me in." Hannah started crying. Liv covered her mouth, backing away. Ethan clenched his fists, his face pale. I stared at the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. That thing wasn't Jason, but it wanted us to believe it was. And worst of all, the lock was broken. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. We stood frozen in the living room, staring at the basement door. The dark stain on the ceiling grew. thick and oily, dripping onto the wooden floor in slow, deliberate drops. Something was seeping through. Hannah wiped her tears, shaking her head. "We need to get out. We need to run." "To where?" Ethan snapped. His voice was sharp, panicked. "Did you see what's out there? There's no way out. There's no..." A creak sounded from upstairs. We all turned. Another step. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was up there. Liv's face twisted in confusion. I thought we were the only ones here." Another footstep. Closer. I grabbed the fireplace poker with sweaty hands, my pulse hammering. "There's someone upstairs." Then, laughter. Soft. Familiar. Jason's laughter. Hannah choked on a sob. "No, that's not..." I gripped the poker tighter and stepped toward the stairs. The others didn't stop me. Maybe they were too afraid. Maybe they wanted answers as badly as I did. I placed one foot on the bottom step. The wood groaned beneath my weight. The laughter stopped. Then, "Where are you guys?" Jason's voice drifted down, light and casual, like he had just woken up and was looking for us. But I had seen him. I had seen what came back up from that basement. And whatever was standing upstairs wasn't him. I hesitated. I wanted to call out, to test if it would answer, but some instinct inside me screamed, "No." Instead, I turned to the others. "Don't make a sound." Liv nodded, clapping a hand over her mouth. Hannah trembled beside her, pressing her back against the couch. Ethan clenched his jaw, his eyes darting between me and the stairs. Another creak. Another step. It was Juan, coming down. My grip tightened on the poker. My heartbeat slammed in my chest, a wild, desperate rhythm. Then, slowly, a shadow stretched across the staircase. The shape of a man, tall, familiar. Jason. But I didn't breathe. I didn't blink, because something was wrong. His legs moved first, then his torso, but his head stayed in place, hovering just above the staircase, as if it hadn't caught up yet. Then, with a sickening jerk, his head snapped forward. His mouth stretched into a grin. Too wide. Too many teeth. "Found you," Hannah screamed. I swung the poker. It connected. But instead of stopping him, his body buckled inward, collapsing like an empty suit of clothes. His form twisted in ways no human body should move. Then, in a blink, he was gone. No sound, no movement, just the heavy silence pressing against us, thick with something wrong. Liv let out a shaky breath. That wasn't him. I swallowed hard. I know. And then, from behind us, a whisper. Drew's voice. "You're next." The whisper slithered through the room like a breath against my ear. "You're next." I spun, heart hammering, but there was no one there. Just shadows stretching across the walls, flickering in the dim light of the dying fire. Hannah was shaking. Liv clutched her arms tightly, her breath uneven. Ethan stood frozen, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. I wanted to say something. Anything. But my throat felt locked, my body numb. Then the lights. flickered. A single heartbeat of darkness, and when they came back, Hannah was gone. Gone. No scream, no sound, just missing. Liv let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. Ethan cursed under his breath, spinning in a frantic circle, searching for her. She was right here, Liv whispered. She was right here. I turned in place, scanning every corner, my eyes darting between shadows. Hannah? My voice was hoarse. Hannah? No answer. The only sound was the slow, methodical drip from the ceiling, black liquid pooling where she had just been standing. I looked up. The stain had spread, thick veins of darkness, crawling across the ceiling like roots. Ethan grabbed my arm. We need to move now. Liv's breathing was coming too fast, too shallow. Where did she go? Then we heard it. A soft tapping. Not from the basement this time. From the walls. Ethan turned toward the nearest one, pressing his ear against the old wood. I hear... A hand shot out. Pale, too long, fingers curling around his wrist. Ethan, wow, screamed and yanked back, but the hand held tight, pulling, dragging him toward the wall. No. I lunged, grabbing his shoulders, but something always strong was pulling him in. The wood wasn't wood anymore. It was soft, wet, breathing. The house was eating him. Help me! Ethan's eyes were wild, desperate. Liv pulled at his other arm, sobbing. No. His body lurched forward. The wall split open like a mouth, swallowing him inch by inch. I held on. Until I couldn't. Until his fingers slipped from mine. Until the wall sealed shut, smooth and untouched, as if he had never been there at all. Liv fell back, shaking her head over and over, whispering, No. I stared at the wall, my body cold, my hands still reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the stairs. I turned, my chest tight with terror. Jason and Hannah stood at the top, smiling. Their eyes were black pits, their bodies too still. And when they spoke, their voices overlapped, a sickening echo of each other. Come with us. Chapter 10. The last one. Jason and Hannah stood at the top of the stairs, watching. Their smiles stretched too wide, their skin pale and too smooth, like wax figures molded into familiar shapes. Their eyes, empty black voids, reflected nothing back. Beside me, Liv let out a broken sob. She clutched my arm, her fingers ice cold. Come with us, they said again, voices layered, unnatural. I forced myself to take a step back. You're not real. Jason, or what was pretending to be him, tilted his head, his neck bent too far, a sickening pop echoing through the room. We are now. Something moved behind them. A shape, shifting, writhing, like a mass of shadow and limbs, pulsing with the house itself, the thing that had taken them, the thing that was still hungry. Liv pulled me toward the door. We have to run. Run. To where? The outside was wrong. The trees had moved. The night never ended. And the house, this house, was alive. I looked at Liv, her eyes wide with terror, her chest rising and falling too fast. She wouldn't make it. Neither of us would. But there was only one way this would end. I turned to the fire. The embers still glowed faintly in the hearth, weak but warm. A set of old iron fireplace tools rested beside them. Iron. Heat. Maybe the house could bleed. I grabbed the iron poker and lunged. The moment the tip of it slammed into Jason's chest, his rare smile dropped. A scream, inhuman, shrieking, ripped through the air. The room trembled. The walls groaned. The wood warping and splitting. The black veins across the ceiling pulsed violently, spilling more of that thick, oily liquid. Jason's body, twisted, convulsing, around the poker like a snake wrapped around a blade. His hands clawed at me, nails scraping my arms, but I held on. I pushed deeper, and Jason, or whatever had been Jason, collapsed. A hollow, skinless thing, crumpling into itself like a dying flame. Hannah screamed. Liv grabbed my wrist. Look, the house was coming apart. The walls split, revealing nothing but black, endless void. The floor buckled, wood peeling away into jagged splinters. A deep, guttural voice rumbled from beneath us. Angry, starving. The house knew. We ran. Liv and I bolted for the door, pushing through the collapsing hallway. The front porch had twisted, stretched, the landscape beyond it shifting like a moving nightmare. But it didn't matter. We had to go. I didn't think. I grabbed Liv's hand and jumped. I hit the ground hard, cold dirt scraping my palms. The scent of damp leaves filled my lungs. Morning. Real morning. Birds chirped. The sky burned a dull, gray blue. The house, or where it had been, was nothing but a dead patch of earth. Liv coughed beside me, shaking. We made it. I didn't answer, because in the wind, I still heard it. A whisper, soft, familiar. Let me out. The town of Hollowbrook sits quietly under the weight of a thick summer heat. It is the kind of place where the air smells of cut grass and sun-warmed asphalt, where neighbors nod in passing but keep their secrets tucked behind closed doors. It is 1993, and the cicadas have been louder this year. An endless, buzzing chorus that rattles through the trees, clinging to the air like something unseen, but always listening. Dr. Solomon Greaves' house stands at the very edge of town, far removed from the modest homes that dot the streets. It is older than the others, its Victorian silhouette standing against the dusky sky like a specter frozen in time. Black iron gates separate it from the world, their bars twisted into elaborate patterns that remind me of ribs in a half-buried skeleton. The mansion beyond is all darkened windows and shadowed corners, its facade barely catching the last light of day. I grip the small glass vial in my pocket. My son, Ethan, hasn't spoken a word in 3 months. Not since that night. The doctors have their theories, and his teachers have their pity, but none of them have answers. They say it will take time, therapy, patience, but I don't have time. I have Dr. Greaves. Just a drop of blood, the psychiatrist had said over the phone, his voice smooth, deliberate. A simple exchange, and in return, I will give your son his voice back. It sounded absurd even then, but desperation makes a man consider things he never would have before. The gravel crunches beneath my shoes as I step forward, past the gate that was already unlocked, as if waiting for me. The front door is massive, made of deep mahogany with a brass knocker shaped like a serpent swallowing its own tail. Something about it unsettles me, but I push the feeling aside and lift my hand to knock. Before I can, the door swings open. Dr. Greaves stands in the threshold, his presence as smooth and polished as his voice. His features are sharp, his dark hair slicked back without a strand out of place. He wears a tailored suit despite the heat, his pale fingers resting lightly on the edge of the door frame. But it is his eyes that hold me in place, deep, dark, and unreadable. "You must be Mr. Holloway," he says, stepping aside in a motion so fluid it almost feels rehearsed. "Please come in. We've been expecting you." I hesitate. "We?" The faintest curve of his lips. "I meant I have been expecting you. Forgive the slip of the tongue." The way he says it makes my skin prickle, but I step inside anyway. The moment I cross the threshold, the air changes. It is colder than it should be, as if the walls have absorbed all warmth and refuse to give it back. The scent of something faintly metallic lingers beneath the polished wood and expensive cologne. The door closes behind me with a soft click. Outside, the cicadas go silent. The silence in the house is unnatural. Not the kind that comes with peace, but the kind that follows something being buried. It presses against my ears as I follow Dr. Greaves down the long hallway, my footsteps muffled against the thick Persian rug. The air here is stale, as if the windows have never been opened. The chandeliers overhead sway slightly, though there is no breeze. "This way," Dr. Greaves says, leading me toward a set of heavy double doors. Inside, his study is dimly lit, the walls lined with towering bookshelves filled with thick leather-bound volumes. A single candle flickers on the large mahogany desk, casting shadows that stretch and curl along the walls. The scent of old paper and something faintly metallic lingers in the air. I can't place it, but it makes my stomach tighten. "Please, have a seat." I lower myself into the chair across from him, feeling the weight of his gaze. He moves with a strange, effortless grace, settling into his own chair with the ease of a man completely in control. "You must have questions," he says, folding his hands together. I grip the vial in my pocket. "I want to understand. How does this work?" His smile is thin, unreadable. "I help children, Mr. Holloway, but certain preparations are necessary." He reaches into a drawer and pulls out a thick folder, sliding it across the desk. I hesitate before opening it. Inside are pages upon pages of names, signatures scrawled at the bottom of each document. Parents, just like me. People who came before. And then I see it. Sarah Lennox. I remember her. We weren't close, but our sons had played together. Then, one day, she packed up and left Hollowbrook without a word. No one knew why. I flipped through the pages. There are others I recognize. People who left town. People no one ever really talked about again. Something in my chest tightens. "Every parent here has trusted me," Dr. Greaves says smoothly, watching me. "And all I require is a single vial of your blood. A small exchange. In return, your son will be free." I don't like how he says it. Free. Like Ethan is trapped in something deeper than silence. I take the vial from my pocket and set it on the desk between us. The candlelight flickers, and for the briefest moment I think I see something in his shadow. A shape that shouldn't be there. Something watching. How does my blood help him? My voice is quieter than I intend. Dr. Greaves lifts the vial, turning it in the light, the deep red catching the glow of the candle. His smile deepens. "Some questions, Mr. Holloway, are better left unanswered." A shiver crawls up my spine. Somewhere in the house, something creaks. A slow, deliberate sound, like footsteps on an old wooden floor. But we are the only ones in the room. The room feels smaller now, the flickering candlelight making the shadows seem alive. Dr. Greaves holds the vial between his fingers, tilting it slightly, watching the blood shift inside as if it holds some secret only he understands. His expression is calm, but there's something in the way his lips curl that unsettles me. I clear my throat. So, what now? Dr. Greaves stands, moving with that same eerie smoothness, and crosses the room to a wooden cabinet. He unlocks it with a small key from his pocket, and the hinges groan as he opens it. I catch a glimpse of what's inside, rows of vials, each filled with dark liquid, neatly arranged like specimens in a lab. My stomach tightens. How many parents have you helped? He finishes my sentence without turning around. Many, Mr. Holloway, but each case is unique. Some children require more delicate attention. He selects an empty space on the shelf and slides my vial into place before closing the cabinet and locking it again. The key vanishes back into his pocket. I swallow the unease rising in my throat. And Ethan, when will I see a difference? Dr. Greaves smiles. Soon. It's not an answer. Not really. But before I can press further, he gestures toward the hallway. Come. I'd like to show you something. I hesitate. The logical part of my brain screams that I should leave, that I should grab the vial back and run. But I don't. Because Ethan is still silent. And if there's even the smallest chance that this could work, I need to see it through. I stand and follow him out of the study, down a corridor lined with old portraits. The faces in the paintings are strange, somber expressions, hollow eyes that seem to follow me. Dr. Greaves walks ahead, his steps soundless. You're a good father, Mr. Holloway. Most parents wouldn't go this far. I glance at the portraits again. Did they? He pauses at the end of the hall and turns to me. His smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. Not all of them. A cold prickle runs down my spine. He opens a door, revealing a staircase leading downward. The air is cooler here, damp with the scent of old stone and something faintly sweet, like decayed flowers. I hesitate. Where are we going? Dr. Greaves steps onto the first stair. To see the results of my work. The silence stretches between us. The candlelight from the hallway barely reaches into the dark below. Every instinct tells me to turn back. But Ethan's face flashes in my mind, his vacant stare, his lips pressed tightly together as if afraid to make a sound. If this can fix him, if this can bring him back to me. I take a breath and step forward. The door swings shut behind us. The stairwell is steep, the stone steps uneven beneath my feet. The walls are narrow, pressing close on either side, the air thick with a damp, musty scent. I follow Dr. Greaves down, my fingers trailing along the cool stone, my heartbeat quickening with each step. The deeper we go, the quieter it becomes, until the silence is absolute. No more cicadas, no hum of electricity, just the soft sound of our breathing and the faint scuff of our shoes against the stone. A dim light flickers at the bottom, casting long shadows across the floor. Dr. Greaves moves effortlessly, leading me into a chamber lined with heavy wooden doors. The air down here feels wrong, stale, like a place that hasn't been disturbed in years. Yet I can feel something just beyond my understanding, lingering in the space around us. I glance at the doors, each identical, thick and reinforced with iron. My chest tightens. What is this place? Dr. Greaves clasps his hands behind his back, surveying the hallway like a curator admiring a collection. A necessary part of the process. I frown. For therapy? He chuckles softly, shaking his head. For transformation? A shiver works its way up my spine. I step closer to one of the doors, my hand hovering over the iron handle. The metal is ice cold beneath my fingertips. There's no sound from the other side, no movement, no sign of what could be in there. Dr. Greaves watches me, an almost amused expression on his face. "Well, would you like to see?" I don't answer. My gut tells me no, but my hand tightens around the handle anyway. Slowly, I turn it. The door groans open an inch, and immediately, a rush of stale air spills out, thick with something I can't name, something that makes my stomach churn. The room beyond is small, dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. The walls are padded like an old asylum cell, and in the center of the room, a child sits with their back to me. My breath catches. For a moment, I think it's Ethan. The same small frame, the same dark hair. But then the child shifts slightly, and something is off. Their posture is too rigid, too unnatural. A strange sound escapes their throat, something between a whisper and a hum, like they're trying to speak, but have forgotten how. I take a step back. Who is this? Dr. Greaves watches with a careful expression. One of my successes. The child tilts their head slightly, as if sensing me. My skin crawls. I don't want to see their face. I shouldn't see their face. Dr. Greaves gently closes the door before the child can turn fully. I exhale, only now realizing I've been holding my breath. He smiles. Now, shall we discuss Ethan's treatment? My hands are clammy, my pulse uneven. I don't know what I just saw, or almost saw, but it wasn't right. The child in that room, the way their head tilted, the sound that slipped from their throat, something about it felt wrong. Dr. Greaves gestures for me to follow him deeper into the underground corridor. My feet hesitate, but I force them to move. I remind myself why I'm here. Ethan. His empty eyes, his silence, the way he looks through me rather than at me. I've tried everything else. If this is what it takes, then I have to keep going. We reach another door, different from the others. This one is newer. It's wood, unmarked. Dr. Greaves produces a key from his pocket and unlocks it, stepping inside without hesitation. I linger at the threshold, gripping the doorframe as I peer in. The room is small, clinical. A single metal chair sits in the center, restraints on the armrests. Against the far wall, a counter holds a collection of medical tools, syringes, scalpels, and things I can't identify. A faint humming fills the space, coming from a machine in the corner, its blinking red light the only thing breaking the dimness. Dr. Greaves turns to me. "Sit." I freeze. "What?" He nods toward the chair. "The process must begin with you, Mr. Holloway. Your son is connected to you, after all." His silence stems from something deeper than trauma. You must be prepared for what comes next. Every instinct in my body screams at me to leave. Get out, take Ethan and run. But then I think of Sarah Lennox, of all the other parents whose names were scrawled in that folder. They trusted him. They believed. I swallow and step inside, lowering myself into the chair. The metal is cold against my back. Dr. Greaves moves with careful precision, fastening the restraints around my wrists, not tight, but firm. "This is only precautionary," he assures me. "Some parents have adverse reactions." My throat tightens. Reactions to what? He doesn't answer. Instead, he picks up a syringe filled with a dark liquid. It's thick, almost black, and as he holds it up to the light, something inside it moves. A slow, writhing shift, as if whatever is inside isn't just liquid, but something alive. I struggle against the restraints. What the hell is that? Dr. Greaves doesn't blink. "A bridge between you and your son." The needle pricks my skin before I can fight back. Cold spreads through my veins instantly, like ice water replacing my blood. My vision blurs at the edges, the room tilting, spinning. My limbs feel heavy, my mind sluggish. Dr. Greaves leans in, his voice a whisper. "It's time you listen, Mr. Holloway. Not to words, but to the silence." Darkness crashes over me. The darkness isn't empty. At first, it's just an absence of sound, of sight, of feeling. But then, beneath the nothingness, I sense movement. Something shifting just beyond the edges of my awareness. A slow, crawling presence, like a whisper slithering through my skull. I try to open my eyes, but I'm not sure if I even have them anymore. My body, where is it? I try to move, to lift my arms, to shift my legs, but there is nothing. No weight, no form, just me, floating in this black sea of silence. Then I hear it, a breath, soft at first, barely more than a sigh against my ear, then another, then dozens, surrounding me, too close. The warmth of them presses against my skin I'm no longer certain I have. And then, a voice. Not a whisper, not a scream, just a voice, steady and familiar. "Dad?" "Ethan." The darkness shudders around me as if reacting to his words. I try to call out, but my throat isn't mine anymore. My voice doesn't exist in this place. Ethan's voice is clearer now. "Dad, why did you bring me here?" Something shifts behind me. No, all around me. A presence, vast and unknowable, stirs in the void, like something waking up. I push against the nothingness, fighting to break free. I have to find him. "Ethan," I try to say, but my voice, no, my very thoughts, feel distant, like I'm being pulled away from myself. And then, I see him. A flicker of pale skin in the darkness, his small form hunched over, arms wrapped around his knees. He looks the same as the last time I saw him, fragile, silent. But his eyes, God, his eyes, they're wide and wet, staring past me, into the endless dark. I reach for him. My hand is nothing but a shadow, stretching toward him. "Ethan, I'm here. It's okay. I'm going to get us out." He flinches, and then slowly he lifts his gaze to mine. "Dad," he says, and his voice is small. "You shouldn't have come." The silence around us cracks. A sound, low and deep, like something vast, breathing, rumbles through the void. I whip around, but there's nothing. Only the shifting darkness, pressing closer, swallowing the space around us. I turn back to Ethan. "We have to go. Now." His little fingers tighten around his knees. "It doesn't let go," he whispers. "Not once it has you." Something cold and wet brushes my shoulder. A sensation like fingers. Too many fingers, dragging along my skin. The breath on my neck grows hotter, closer. The silence isn't empty. It never was. And now, it's listening. Ethan's words send a bolt of ice through me. It doesn't let go. The presence around us shifts, growing heavier. The darkness isn't just empty space. It's alive, pressing in, coiling, stretching. I can feel it watching, waiting, as if it's deciding something. I reach for Ethan, but my fingers pass through him like smoke. My breath stutters. He's here, but he's not. Here. "Ethan, we have to leave," I say, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come to me. Now." His face twists, and it's a look I don't recognize. Something between sorrow and fear. You don't understand, he whispers. I didn't choose this. The darkness stirs. A shape forms just beyond my vision. Tall, thin, its body shifting in ways that make my stomach churn, like it can't decide what it wants to be. One moment it has arms, the next, it's all jagged limbs, stretching and shrinking. It doesn't move like a person. It crawls, like liquid dripping upward. And then I see its eyes. No, not eyes. Holes. Deep, empty sockets where eyes should be. They lock onto me, unblinking, unfeeling, as if they've already seen everything I am, everything I could be, and found it insignificant. A voice slithers through the silence. Not spoken, not heard. Felt. He is ours. I grab Ethan's shoulders, forcing myself to focus. No one owns you, I say, louder now. I'm taking you home. He shakes his head violently. You don't get it, Dad. I'm not... The darkness splits. A gaping maw tears open in the void behind him, stretching wider than anything should be able to. The thing doesn't move toward us. It simply expands, like the space around us is warping into it, folding into its endless nothing. And Ethan, my son, his small frame begins to blur. No, I breathe. No, no, no. Stay with me, Ethan. I grab him tighter, but my hands sink through him again, his body flickering like a dying signal. His eyes dart up to mine, and for the first time in months, I see panic in them. Dad, he whispers, and this time, it's not a warning. It's a plea. I do the only thing I can think of. I pull him to me, wrapping my arms around his fading form, holding him as tightly as I can. If I go back, I'm taking him with me. If I stay, then we'll both be trapped. Either way, I'm not letting go. The darkness roars, a soundless, crushing force that shatters everything around us. The void collapses inward. I feel it pulling me apart, stretching me into something I don't understand. Then just as suddenly, light. A flash. A breath. A single shuddering gasp. And then, the world snaps back into place. I gasp like a drowning man breaking the surface. My body convulses, my lungs burning as if I haven't breathed in hours. Cold air rushes in, sharp and biting, flooding my senses all at once. I'm no longer in the dark. The ceiling above me is high, lined with wooden beams. The dim glow of candlelight flickers along the walls. My body feels heavy, my limbs sluggish, as if I've been asleep for days. My wrists ache. I glance down and realize I'm still in the chair, the leather restraints digging into my skin. For a moment, I can't think, can't move. The memory of the void, of it, is still too close, clinging to the edges of my mind like something trying to pull me back under. Then I hear a sound, soft, small. I snap my head to the side. Ethan. He's standing near the door, barefoot, his thin frame swallowed by the oversized pajama shirt he wore the night he stopped speaking. His eyes are locked on mine, wide and glassy, as if he isn't sure if I'm real. Relief surges through me so fiercely I nearly choke on it. Ethan. My voice is hoarse, barely more than a whisper. He doesn't answer, doesn't move, just stares. I struggle against the restraints. Ethan, it's me. Come here, bud. Still, he doesn't move. There's something wrong with his expression. It's blank. Too blank. Then, slowly, his lips part. Dad. A shudder crawls up my spine. His voice is strange, like it's been untouched for too long. And the way he says it, it's not relief, not recognition. It's like he's testing the word, feeling it out, as if it doesn't belong to him. The restraints snap open. Not by my doing. They simply unbuckle, one after the other, peeling away like unseen hands are undoing them. My breath catches. I don't think. I just move, lurching forward, stumbling as my legs threaten to buckle beneath me. I drop to my knees in front of Ethan, gripping his arms. "You're okay," I breathe. "You're okay now." He doesn't blink. His pupils are too large, swallowing the color of his irises. I shake him gently. "Ethan, say something else. Anything." He tilts his head, studying me. A flicker of something passes over his face, too quick to catch, too wrong to be his usual expressions. Then, softly, "You shouldn't have pulled me out." My stomach drops. The candlelight flickers violently, shadows stretching along the walls. The air in the room shifts, like a breath inhaling, unseen but present. Behind me, a voice that isn't Ethan's whispers, "He is not yours anymore." I whirl around. Dr. Greaves stands in the doorway, calm, pleased. And Ethan? Ethan smiles. Not like a child, like something else. My skin turns to ice. Ethan is still looking at me, but it's not him. It's his face, his body, his voice. But the way he's standing, the way his lips are curling into that slow, deliberate smile, that's not how my son smiles. That's not how he moves. I push myself back onto my feet, my legs shaking beneath me. My pulse pounds in my ears, my body screaming at me to run, but I can't. Ethan, or whatever this is still standing there, watching me. Dr. Greaves folds his hands behind his back, stepping closer. "You should be honored, Mr. Holloway. Very few parents get to witness this moment." I turn to him, my voice sharp. "What did you do to him?" Dr. Greaves sighs, tilting his head slightly, like he's dealing with a stubborn child. "I told you. I helped him. You came to me because your son was lost. I simply made him found." Ethan, or the thing, inside. Ethan blinks slowly, tilting his head at an unnatural angle. "It's quiet now," he murmurs. "I don't have to fight anymore." My stomach lurches. I step forward, reaching for him, but my fingers hesitate just before touching his skin. Something's wrong. Something's missing. "Ethan," I whisper. "It's me. Come back." His lips twitch. "I am back, Dad." But that's a lie. I know it. I feel it. Because Ethan had a nervous habit of fidgeting, shifting from foot to foot when he was uncomfortable. Ethan had a slight overbite, his two front teeth a little too big for his mouth. Ethan's eyes, my son's eyes, were warm, even in his silence. But this thing standing in front of me, it is too still. Its teeth are too perfect. And its eyes, they are wrong. Dr. Greaves lets out a satisfied sigh. "I must say, this has gone beautifully. Some children resist, some fight, but Ethan was ready." I snap my head toward him. "Ready for what?" He gestures slightly toward my son, as if the answer is obvious. "A trade." The room seems to tilt. "A trade?" Dr. Greaves's smile is almost pitying. "Did you really think your son's mutism was ordinary? That his silence was just trauma?" "No, Mr. Holloway. Ethan was already half gone when you brought him here. Something was waiting for him. Something from the spaces between." He exhales. "And you? You only sped up the process." My stomach flips. My head spins. My pulse is thundering so loudly I barely hear my own voice when I whisper, "Where is he?" Dr. Greaves lifts an eyebrow. I turn back to Ethan. No, not Ethan, not anymore. And I see it. The flicker. The smallest hesitation in his expression. My son is still in there. Buried. Trapped. And whatever is standing in front of me, it is wearing him like a mask. My breath is shallow, my hands shaking at my sides. The thing wearing Ethan's face blinks at me, slow and deliberate, as if adjusting to its new body. Dr. Greaves watches with a quiet satisfaction, his posture relaxed, like this is nothing more than another success, full appointment. But I see it. The flicker. The tiny fracture in Ethan's expression. Something real just beneath the surface. My son isn't gone. Not completely. I take a step closer. Ethan, I whisper, forcing my voice to be steady. I know you can hear me. The thing tilts its head. The smile on Ethan's lips twitches, faltering for just a second. Dr. Greaves clicks his tongue. Now, Mr. Holloway. It's better this way. He was always meant for something greater. I don't care. I don't listen. My focus is on him. I crouch slightly, reaching out again, ignoring the ice curling around my spine. You're still in there, I say, desperate now. I know you are. The thing in his body, it hesitates. Just for a fraction of a second, but it's enough. Then, a sound. A soft, shaky breath. Ethan's breath. Dr. Greaves' eyes narrow. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I whirl on him, fury overtaking my fear. You took my son! My voice is raw, my vision blurred with rage. Dr. Greaves only sighs. I didn't take him. He was chosen. I don't think. I move. I grab the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight from the desk, and swing it with everything I have. It connects with Dr. Greaves' skull with a sickening crack. His eyes go wide, shock flashing across his face as he staggers backward, his hand flying to his temple. Blood seeps between his fingers, dark and thick. Something in the air shifts. Ethan gasps, a sharp, ragged inhale, like he's suddenly drowning in open air. His body convulses, his fingers clawing at the fabric of his shirt, his eyes wild and scared. I don't hesitate. I grab him, pulling him against me, holding him so tightly I swear I can feel his heartbeat pounding against my ribs. His body trembles, his breathing sharp and erratic. Dad? He chokes out, his real voice, his small, fragile voice. He's here. I don't wait to see if Dr. Greaves gets back up. I don't look back. I haul Ethan toward the door, throwing it open so hard it rattles on its hinges. The house groans around us. The shadows move. I don't stop. I don't breathe. I run, down the hall, up the stairs, through the heavy front door and into the humid night air. We don't look back. We don't stop running. The cicadas are screaming again. But this time, I know they're warning us. The church smelled of old wood and melted wax, the kind of scent that lingered in the air long after the faithful had gone home. The pews sat empty, their polished surfaces catching the glow of flickering candlelight. Stained glass saints watched in silent judgment from the high windows, their colorful faces fractured by darkness. I stood at the pulpit, staring out at the hollow space before me. This was where she had last sat. The second row, right-hand side, a worn Bible resting on her lap, fingers tracing the edges of the pages. She had believed. And where had it gotten her? My grip tightened around the matchbook in my hand. The red lettering was faded, the edges damp with sweat. St. Mercy Catholic Church, founded 1884. The place had stood for over a century, weathering storms, war, decay, but it wouldn't survive tonight. I glanced toward the altar, the wooden cross standing tall above it, the figure of Christ, arms outstretched, head tilted in sorrow. How many prayers had been whispered beneath that gaze? How many desperate pleas had gone unheard? I knew better than most that prayers meant nothing, not after what had happened to Anna. She had been 16, too young to die, too young to be lying in a coffin beneath 6 feet of frozen earth while I stood in this place, pretending to believe in something greater than loss. But not anymore. I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out a flask. The whiskey burned as it slid down my throat, a final toast to the life I had before the sickness, before the prayers went unanswered, before I buried the only family I had left. The matchbook felt heavy in my palm, a final sermon, a cleansing fire. I struck the first match, watching as the tiny flame danced at my fingertips. Then, a whisper. Soft, almost lost beneath the crackling of the match. I turned. The church was empty. The doors were locked. But the whisper came again. Closer. The flame flickered. Died. I swallowed hard, relighting the match, forcing myself to move toward the nearest pew. I drizzled the whiskey along the wooden surface, the smell of alcohol thick in the air. Then, another sound. Not a whisper this time. A footstep. Behind me. I spun, breath caught in my throat. The pulpit stood empty. The aisles stretched long and dark. The candlelight flickered against the stained glass saints, warping their faces into something else. Something watching. The air grew thick, heavy. A slow pressure built in my chest. Then, in the silence, a voice, low, guttural, right at my ear. You are not alone. The match dropped from my fingers, and the church door slammed shut. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the empty church, rattling through the wooden pews like a warning. My breath came short and fast, the match slipping from my fingers, its tiny ember vanishing against the cold stone floor. I turned sharply toward the entrance, my pulse hammering. The heavy oak doors, once ajar to welcome the faithful, stood sealed. Locked. A gust of wind, or something like it, moved through the church, flickering the candles, making the shadows dance. The stained glass saints looked different now. Their expressions, once solemn, now seemed almost amused. Their eyes, once frozen in glass, seemed to shift. Watching. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe. It's just the wind, just nerves. But then the voice came again. This is his house. It came from everywhere at once, whispered from the rafters, rising from the floor, seeping from the very walls. A chorus of voices, layered and hollow. Some voices I didn't recognize. One I did. Anna. My body went rigid. No, that's not possible. I turned toward the altar, where the massive wooden crucifix loomed over me. The figure of Christ, nailed to the cross, had changed. His eyes were open now, staring straight at me. The breath hitched in my throat. My skin prickled with cold. Then, his lips moved. You do not belong here. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the first pew. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out, to get away, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The candles along the walls flickered violently, their flames bending, twisting toward me. The air grew thick with the scent of burning wood, but I hadn't lit the fire yet. The whispering started again, faster this time, urgent, like a warning. Leave, leave, leave. My hand shook as I reached for the flask again, taking a desperate swig, the burn doing nothing to settle my nerves. I forced my voice to steady. "I am leaving," I muttered, stepping toward the door. A loud crack split the air. The pew nearest to me splintered in half, the wood bursting apart as if struck by an unseen force, and shards flew through the air, one slicing across my cheek. I flinched, bringing a hand to my face, feeling the warm trickle of blood. I had seen enough. Heart pounding, I ran for the door, grabbing the iron handles and pulling with all my strength. Nothing. I shoved harder. Still nothing. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, the words overlapping, twisting into something almost incomprehensible. Almost. But beneath the chaos, one voice stood out. Soft, familiar. "You are not forgiven." Anna. I turned sharply, and there she was, standing in the center aisle, watching me. She stood in the center of the aisle, her bare feet silent against the cold stone floor. Anna, or something that looked like her. My breath hitched. My sister had been dead for the 6 months. I had buried her, wept over her grave, cursed the sky until my throat was raw. But here she was, whole, unbroken, standing beneath the glow of the candlelight. Her dress was the same one she had worn to Mass the last time I saw her, pale blue, lace along the sleeves. But there was something wrong about it, like the fabric didn't quite move right, like it was made of something that only pretended to be cloth. And her eyes. Anna's eyes had been warm, full of life. The eyes that looked at me now were empty. Deep, bottomless voids, sucking in the candlelight, swallowing it whole. She tilted her head, smiled. "You were supposed to save me." The words hit me like a fist to the chest. My vision blurred. Anna. She took a step forward, her movements unnatural, like a puppet learning how to walk. "Do you remember what you said?" Her voice was soft, almost playful. "You held my hand and told me I would be okay, that God was watching." I said that. Kneeling beside her hospital bed, gripping her fragile fingers in my own, whispering prayers I barely believed, begging God to take me instead. But he didn't. Anna coughed once, her smile never faltering. Something dark and wet dripped from the corner of her mouth. Not blood. Something thicker. Darker. "I waited," she whispered. "I prayed, but he never came, and neither did you." I took a step back. "This isn't real." Her smile widened. "Isn't it?" The candles behind her flickered, their flames stretching unnaturally high, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. The stained glass saints, warped, their faces twisting in agony, their eyes no longer filled with judgment, but terror. A deep, guttural groan rumbled from beneath the floorboards. The entire church shuddered. The scent of burning wood thickened, though there were no flames. Not yet. Anna took another step forward. Her bare foot left a blackened print on the stone. The floor burned beneath her touch. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. "What do you want?" Her smile died. The candles snuffed out at once, plunging the church into darkness. Then her voice, right in my ear, a whisper slithering beneath my skin. "I want you to suffer." The ground beneath me collapsed. I was falling into something deep, something hungry. And Anna was laughing as the church swallowed me whole. I hit the ground hard. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my back, knocking the breath from my lungs. The air was thick, damp, suffocating, and the scent of rotting wood and something worse filled my nostrils. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The darkness was absolute, wrapping around me like a shroud. Then, somewhere in the distance, drip. A slow, rhythmic dripping echoed through the space around me. Water? Blood? I didn't know. I pushed myself up, wincing as my fingers pressed into something soft. The ground beneath me wasn't stone. It wasn't wood. It felt wrong. Like flesh stretched too thin over brittle bones. Swallowing hard, I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the matchbook. My hands shook as I struck a match. A tiny flame flickered to life, casting weak, trembling light around me. I wished I had stayed in the dark. The floor beneath me was pulsing. A sickly veined surface, shifting with a slow, rhythmic movement, like breathing. I scrambled to my feet, stepping back, my boot sinking slightly into the fleshy ground. My stomach turned. I wasn't in the church anymore. The walls around me stretched high, damp and cracked with decay. A tunnel. The stone here was ancient, covered in something thick and black, oozing down in slow rivulets. The air buzzed with a low, droning hum, almost like whispers. Then I noticed the symbols, carved into the walls, deep, jagged gashes, as if someone had taken a knife and carved frantically into the stone. Crosses, twisted into something unrecognizable. Words I didn't understand. A language not meant to be spoken. The match burned low, the flame licking my fingers. Then, movement. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, something shifted. A wet, dragging sound. Slow, deliberate. I didn't want to see it, but the match gave just enough light to show the outline. A figure. Tall, too tall, its limbs wrong, stretched too long. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its body shuddering, as if barely held together. It took another step. The sound of bones scraping against stone sent a chill through my spine. The match flickered. I didn't wait for it to go out. I ran. My boots slammed against the pulsing ground, my breath coming fast, ragged. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, twisting and narrowing, the air growing calm, thicker, wetter. The whispers followed me. Anna's voice. "You can't run from him." Something brushed my shoulder. I swung blindly behind me, but there was nothing. I kept running. Then, suddenly, a doorway. A massive, rotting wooden door. Standing alone in the middle of the tunnel, covered in deep claw marks. The whispers screamed. Now, loud and deafening. And behind me, a hand reached from the dark. The hand grazed my shoulder. Cold, wet, wrong. I lunged forward, gripping the rusted iron handle of the massive wooden door. It groaned under my weight, the wood splitting at the edges, as if something had tried to tear through it before. Behind me, the whispers screamed. Not words anymore, just a garbled, writhing mass of sound, crawling into my ears, under my skin. The thing in the tunnel was close, its breath hot and ragged against the back of my neck. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. The second I crossed the threshold, the air changed. The whispers cut off. The overwhelming heat of the tunnel vanished, replaced by a deep, damp cold that settled into my bones. I turned and slammed the door shut, bracing against it. The moment it clicked into place, the thing outside stopped. Silence. I stepped back, my breath coming in uneven gasps. The door stood, completely still. No rattling, no scratching, just stillness. I wasn't safe. I knew. I wasn't safe. But whatever was behind that door couldn't follow me here. I turned to face the room. It was, a church. Or what used to be one. The ceiling arched high, but the stone was cracked, bleeding dark rivulets down the walls. The wooden pews were charred. Their surfaces burned black as if touched by fire. But there was no smoke, no ash. At the far end of the room stood another their altar. Not like the one in St. Mercy. This one was wrong. The wooden cross above it was twisted, its shape bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The figure upon it was not Christ. It was something else. Something with too many arms. And at the foot of the altar, Anna. She knelt there, her back to me, her hands clasped as if in prayer. My stomach turned. She wasn't real. She couldn't be real. But she turned her head slightly. Not fully, just enough to let me see her profile. A small, knowing smile. "You made it." Her voice was soft, pleased. I took a slow step forward, fists clenched. "Anna." She didn't answer. She stood. The candlelight flickered, stretching her shadow unnaturally long, bending it across the walls like something with too many limbs. When she finally faced me, her eyes were no longer empty. They were, burning. Not with light, with hunger. I stepped back. "You're not her." Anna's lips curled. But I could be. Behind her, the Maya thing on the cross began to move. The wood groaned. The altar shook. And I realized, far too late, I had only gone deeper. Anna, or the thing wearing her face, watched me with those burning eyes. I could feel something wrong in the air between us. A pressure, like the entire room was leaning toward me, waiting. The figure on the twisted cross shifted, its extra limbs twitching, stretching. I fought the urge to run. There was nowhere to go. Anna took a step closer, her bare feet soundless against the stone floor. The burned pews and cracked walls warped around her, like they were responding to her presence. She tilted her head, smiled. You don't have to be afraid. My pulse pounded in my skull. What are you? She blinked, almost as if surprised by the question. I am what you prayed for. I shook my head, taking a step back. No, I never. Didn't you? Her voice softened, almost tender. You wanted justice. Vengeance. You wanted to punish him. The air grew thicker, pressing against my lungs. Anna stepped forward again, slow, deliberate. The candlelight flickered, and for a second her face wasn't hers anymore. Her skin cracked, splintering into something charred and blackened. Her mouth stretched too wide, teeth jagged like broken glass. Then, just as quickly, she was Anna again. Whole, smiling. She reached for my hand. Come, she whispered. See what he left behind. I didn't want to move, but my feet betrayed me. One step forward, then another. Anna turned and led me toward the altar. The thing on the cross twitched, its limbs shifting in slow, unnatural movements. The closer we got, the more I could hear it. A low, ragged breathing. It was alive. The twisted wood creaked as it strained against the nails pinning it down. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, shuddering movements. Then, it spoke. A voice like cracking stone. You do not belong here. The sound rattled through my bones, vibrating through the very walls of the ruined church. Anna didn't flinch. She only turned to me, her smile widening. Do you see now? My throat was dry. See what? Anna took my hand. And everything changed. The room vanished. For a moment, I wasn't in the church. I was back in Anna's hospital room. I saw myself kneeling beside her bed, gripping her frail fingers, whispering prayers I didn't believe. I saw the machines, the beeping slowing, the doctors speaking in hushed voices. I saw the moment. She died. And then, the moment after, when the room went still, when I sat there, alone, feeling nothing but the weight of God's silence. I had been wrong. He wasn't silent. He was never there. The vision snapped away. I was back in the ruined church, Anna's hand still in mine. Her lips brushed my ear. "Now do you understand?" I staggered back, wrenching my hand from Anna's grip. My chest felt tight, my breath ragged. The weight of what I had seen, what she had shown me, pressed against my ribs like a vice. I knew that memory. I had lived it. But the moment after, the stillness, the emptiness that came when she was gone, that had felt like an eternity. And now I knew why. There had never been anyone listening. Anna smiled, watching me with quiet amusement. Waiting. The thing on the cross stirred again, its breathing growing heavier. The nails pinning it in place creaked, the wooden beams groaning under its weight. "He left you," Anna said softly. My fists clenched. "God doesn't leave people." Her smile widened. "He does. He did." I turned away, pressing my hands against my face. My head ached, my pulse hammering in my skull. No, this wasn't real. It was some kind of trick, a nightmare. It had to be. Anna's voice drifted closer. "You asked for a sign, didn't you? You begged for something, anything. And what did he do?" My breath hitched. "Nothing. He did nothing." I shook my head. No, I won't believe this." I turned back toward her, rage boiling in my chest. "And what are you? Some kind of punishment? A demon? What?" Anna's expression didn't change. She stepped closer, slow, deliberate, her bare feet burning prints into the floor with each step. "I am truth." Behind her, the Waka figure on the cross moved. It shifted, muscles tearing, blackened limbs stretching against the twisted wood. And then, its head lifted. A deep, ragged breath escaped its throat. Its eyes, hollow, empty pits, locked onto mine. And in that moment, I again felt it. A vast, crushing absence. A hunger so deep it had no end. This thing, whatever it was not God. It was the guy. Space he left behind. A cold horror settled into my bones. I had spent my life believing in something greater. Even when I lost my faith, even when I cursed the heavens and planned to burn his house to the ground, I still believed he was there. But what if he wasn't? What if he had never been? The air in the room thickened, pressing against me, making it harder to breathe. The walls trembled. The black veins pulsed along the cracked stone. The thing on the cross shuddered. Then, in a voice like breaking bones, it spoke. "There is no one left to hear you." The last candle snuffed out. And the room collapsed into darkness. The darkness swallowed me whole. It wasn't the kind of darkness that came with nightfall. It wasn't empty. It was thick, suffocating, alive. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The weight of it pressed against me, pushing into my skin, creeping into my lungs like cold fingers. Then a whisper. Not Anna's, not the thing on the cross. Something about deeper, older. It slithered through the blackness, curling around my ears, pressing into my thoughts. You were never meant to see. A hand grabbed my wrist. I recoiled, but it held tight, its fingers long, too strong. I thrashed, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then, light. A faint, flickering glow. I looked down. Anna's face stared up at me, but it wasn't her. Her skin was pale, stretched too tight over her skull. Her mouth was wrong, curling at the edges like something that had been taught to smile but never quite learned how. And her eyes, black, endless pits, were filled with hunger. I jerked away. The wow whispers grew louder, overlapping, twisting, pressing into my skull. Not real, not real, not real. I scrambled backward, my boots scraping against the uneven ground, but there was nowhere to go. The light grew stronger. Shapes emerged from the dark. Figures. Dozens. Hundreds. They stood, motionless, silent, watching. Some I recognized. Faces from the church, parishioners, people who had come to me for guidance, for absolution. All of them were dead. All of them had been forgotten. Anna stepped closer, her bare feet leaving blackened prints on the ground. You always thought you mattered, she whispered, that your pain meant something, that suffering had a purpose. She leaned in, her voice curling against my ear like smoke. But there is no plan. No one is listening. There is only this. The figures surrounding me moved. At once, shifting forward in perfect, unnatural unison. Their mouths opened, but there was no sound. Only the whispers. Only the hunger. My chest tightened. I had to get out. I turned, and the altar was there. It had moved, shifted. It was waiting for me. The twisted cross loomed above it, the thing nailed to it now fully awake. Its head tilted, its mouth curling into something that might have been a grin, and then it spoke. Kneel. The figures pressed closer. The walls pulsed. The darkness breathed. And I felt it. Something opening beneath me. A hollow place, waiting to swallow me whole. The ground beneath me shifted. It wasn't stone, wasn't earth. It was something else. Something vast, hollow, breathing beneath my feet like a creature stirring from sleep. The figures, the parishioners, the forgotten, the dead, stood in perfect stillness, their empty faces turned toward me. The whispers never stopped, pressing against my skull like 1,000 hands. The thing on the cross watched, waiting. Anna stepped closer, tilting her head. You understand now, don't you? I didn't answer. She smiled. You've seen it. The absence. The lie they built their faith upon. The silence they worship. The twisted cross loomed above her. The thing nailed to it. Twitched. Stretched. Its extra limbs tensed against the rusted nails, its skin splitting at the joints like old leather. It wasn't suffering. It was becoming. My body screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. I looked at Anna, my voice hoarse. "What do you want from me?" Her smile widened. "We want you to choose." I swallowed. Choose what? The air thickened. The figures shifted. The space around me, warping, pulling me closer to the altar. Anna lifted a hand. "Burn it down." I hesitated. She stepped forward, her voice almost gentle. "Isn't that what you wanted?" I had come here tonight to destroy Saint Mercy, to reduce it to an ash, to take from God what he had taken from me. But this wasn't what I had wanted. Anna's fingers brushed my cheek. Cold, brittle. "You don't have to fight anymore." Her voice curled around me, soft, coaxing. "You don't have to kneel before nothing. No more waiting for prayers that will never be answered." She pressed something into my hand. I looked down. A matchbook. My matchbook. Saint Mercy Catholic Church. Founded 1884. I had dropped it back in the church, but now it was here, resting in my palm like it had been waiting for me. I looked at the altar. At the thing on the cross. It watched. Not with judgment. With expectation. Waiting. Anna whispered, "All it takes is a spark." The whispers rose. The ground shifted. The chava. Hunger. In the air pressed against my skin. Waiting. 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 I swallowed. Then slowly, I struck the match. The tiny flame flickered to life, trembling in the darkness. The figures moved, their heads tilting in unison. The thing on the cross let out a slow, rattling exhale. Anna smiled. And then from behind me, a voice, weak, strained, familiar. "Don't." I turned sharply, my heart slamming against my ribs. And there, standing at the edge of the darkness, Anna. The real Anna. Her face pale. Afraid. Her eyes. Her real eyes. Pleading. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let it in." Chapter 10. Ashes. I froze. The match burned low between my fingers, the tiny flame flickering in the thick, unnatural air. Anna, the real Anna, stood just beyond the altar, her small frame trembling, her wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't let it in." Behind me, the other Anna, the one that wasn't her, laughed. A soft, knowing sound. I turned back to her, and she was different now. Her face was stretching, twisting, as if it was trying to hold its shape but failing. Her smile was too wide, her teeth too sharp. The thing on the cross twitched, stretched, waited. The figures in the dark crept closer. I understood now. It had never been about punishing God. It had been about Raoul replacing him. Something had been waiting beneath Saint Mercy for a long, long time. Something hollow, something hungry. And it needed me to let it out. Anna, my real Anna, took a step toward me, her voice desperate. "You can still stop it." The other Anna's smile faltered. The thing on the cross let out a low, rumbling growl. I looked down at the match. I could still burn it. I could let something new take his place. Or I turned the match in my fingers. The flame licked at the tip, shrinking, dying. I could end this. The whispering grew frantic now, urgent, pleading. Anna, the false Anna, stepped forward. Her body was cracking apart now, like burned paper curling at the edges. Her eyes flared, burning pits of hunger. You can't stop it. The thing on the cross let out a guttural snarl. The figures surged forward, the darkness closing in. I clenched my teeth. Then I did the only thing I could. I swallowed the flame. My fingers crushed the match between my hands, snuffing out the fire before it could spread. The reaction was immediate. The whispers turned to screams. The altar cracked. Down the center, a deep, jagged wound splitting through the twisted wood. The thing on the cross convulsed, its extra limbs spasming violently, as if something was being ripped away. The false Anna let out a shriek, her form collapsing inward, breaking apart like charred bone. The ground beneath me shook. The darkness collapsed in on itself. And then, light. Blinding, searing light. I was in the church again. St. Mercy stood whole, untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. The pews were unbroken. The stained glass saints were still in place, their expressions unreadable. The wooden cross above the altar stood tall, and Anna was gone. All of them were. I stood there for a long time, my hands still shaking, the scent of ash lingering in my nostrils. I reached into my pocket. The matchbook was gone. The only thing left was the silence, and the feeling that something, somewhere, was still watching.